Anyway, welcome everybody. The inspiration for this talk was actually this little piece of cardboard that had been sitting in our bookshelves for quite some time, and I never really got it until I actually, maybe I should just pass this along.
Until I told it to you.
Yeah, well, you told it to me or whatever. It actually had this little text in it that I completely missed all the time. So, yeah, pardon the cocoon. Apart from the spelling, which apparently Larry is not very good at. Yeah, okay, so the camel is cocooning. So, let's do a small recap. If you look at PIL 5 from 2000 to 2010, we basically had 5.6 in 2000, we had 5.8 in 2002, then it took 5 years to get 5.10, then it took 3 years to get 5.12, but since then we have a yearly release. So I would say the lean years of PIL 5 have passed. If you look at PIL 6 for the same period, we had the original Camel herders meeting, we had the request for comments process. Yeah, I was there actually, by accident, but yeah. We had the apocalypses, the exegesis, and the synopses.
Thankfully only the last one survived, because we can say it.
Yes. We had Parrot as a virtual machine for everybody. Everybody in the sense, every language in the world. And that means not PIL 6, but yeah. We had Pugs, which is another implementation of PIL 6 on Haskell. And we had that also made the PIL test suite. We have Rakudo starting on Parrot, and we got Nietzsche starting on Mono.net. But you could really argue that nothing of this was production ready. So, so you could really say that the zeros were the cocooning years of Perl, because Perl was really busy with itself. It was redefining itself, it was reinventing itself. And so, yeah, what is Perl anyway? But I would say these years have passed. We're going ahead now. So, we're now decocooning in Perl. We're getting out of the cocoon. But it's not going to be your normal decocooning, because normally you get only one thing out of the cocoon, but in this case you get actually two things out of the cocoon. So, if we're looking forward, we have PIL 5 and PIL 6 coexisting for a long time to come. So what does PIL 5 look like in the tens? We have a new release every year in PIL 5. We have many optimizations inside PIL 5, a lot of internal code cleanup, which has been very useful for trying to add new features. We have many PIL 6-like features in the core. I'll get back to these in a little moment. We had a lot of PIL 6-like modules, like moose, moo, mouse, moose. I read something about that this morning.
Moose, moo, mo. Every possible combination is available.
Yeah. We've had method signatures and we had promises on CPAN. And we have a monthly development release for PIL 5. And 5.20 is about to come out. And earlier this morning, the first official release candidate of 5.20 is out.
Especially for works.
Yes. So if you're really into PIL 5, make sure that you get this version. This is the moment to find out that your code will have problems with this. If you don't find it out now, you will have to wait for another release, which could take a year.
Do the MOP get in?
Sorry?
The object, the lightweight object model?
No.
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 Not yet.
No. The mod is not in. It's not going to be in 5.22 either, probably. There's actually a blog post of Stephen Little on blogs.perl.org where he explains everything. So it's right yesterday, I think he put it in there. So how does PIL 6 do in the tens? We have Nietzsche, which at one point was almost feature complete, and then we changed the specs again. Okay. We have Not Quite Perl, developed as standalone. we have 6 model on NQP, which is like the object model of PL6, with multiple backends, which makes it possible for us to actually run PL6 on JVM, on Parrot, on MoreVM. We have MoreVM, a new virtual machine for PL6. It's now the fastest, but I'm also told not the utmost stable yet, so there's still some work to do there. So we now have Rakudo running on Parrot, JVM and MoreVM, so it's 3 backends. If you're really into long-running processes, do the JVM. If you're into stability, use Parrot. If you're into being on the bleeding edge, use More. And of course, most of the development, I would argue, is actually happening now for the JVM and the MoreVM area. And Parrot is, yeah, well, I wouldn't say that, but yes.
If I may interject something, some people who were on Nyesha might wonder sort of where it went. And Nyesha was doing great. Nyesha was ahead of Rakudo, and then 6 model happened, basically. And all these things fell into place in Rakudo.
Okay.
And the developer of Nyesha basically felt, okay, I will never catch up with this unless I do 6 model myself, which will just be copying Rakudo. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you know no more than I did about that. I just know that Stefan basically started working on Rakudo at one point, and then sort of
that was the
disappeared.
point.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And we also have a monthly development release for PL6 on Rakudo. I should actually add. So, will this continue to coexist? Yes, but I think it's going to be changing a little bit. I think PL6 is going to become much more important for the PL community in the total, and for the main reason really that it is more future-proof than PL5. But PL5, of course, if you're really into performance at the moment, single core performance I should add probably, then you should go for PL5. So what are the cool PL6 features that we have in PL5 at the moment? We have say, we have yada yada yada. We have state variables, we have define or, lexical subs, subroutine signatures. All these features are basically okay as long as they don't involve types. There are more features of PL6 and PL5, but we'll get to that later. So, this is your PL5 code with say, and how does it look in PL6? Well, there's no difference. It's exactly the same. The yada yada yada, the dot dot dot. In PL5, if you run it, it will say not implemented. If you try to put it into a variable, it actually doesn't work because it's only for directly executable code. I guess I'm not sure how this actually parses in PL5. Nobody really knows how PL5 parses things, so yeah, it doesn't work. In PL6, the naming, the text is a little bit different. It just says stop code executed. So why would you use this yada yada yada? Well, you're developing something and you know this method has to be implemented at one point, but you just want to make sure and have a placeholder there. But you also want to make sure that it dies when you actually use it. And this is the way to actually do that. You can also put a die in there and say die, not unimplemented, but that's more typing. This is easier. And in PL6, you can actually put the yada yada into a variable. And you can in PL6 ask what's in the variable, and it will tell you actually it's a failure. The moment that you actually try to do something with the failure, then it will actually die on you. So it's very easy in PL6 to actually delay, catch failures, and throw them later. Very nice to have, especially if you're going doing things asynchronously. It's very handy that some things don't die at the wrong time. State variables, you can specify a state variable in PL5, you give it an initial value, and over invocation of the subroutine, it will actually keep that value. So this will just go from 11 to 20. And in PL6, it's basically the same here. You can specify your ranges differently. And in fact, if you look at it, this is stupid really. So if you take away the 0 dot dot, it also works. And the correct 10 basically means up to 10, but don't do 10. The defined OR, something that I know some people actually have backported to earlier versions of PL5 because they really need it for their work. It basically means if the left hand side of something is undefined, then take the right hand side. If you just use the OR, it's basically it's the Boolean value of this that decides whether or not to take the left or the right value. So in this case, if we have nothing in $A, this backslash will take the B, and the OR will also take the B. But if we put a 0 in there, which is Boolean false, then this case will actually take the B, but this case will actually take the 0. And it's very handy to actually handle things when you have optional parameters to subroutines that are undefined. And you don't want to actually have to check if it's 0 or not. You can use defined OR. And in PL6, that's exactly the same. So, lexical subroutines. In PL5, from I think it's 5.18 onward, you can actually specify a subroutine that is only known within the scope that you define it in. So you have a subroutine A, I call it here inside the scope and it works. I call it outside the scope and it doesn't know what to call. This is very handy for encapsulating code for you. So basically outside here it's basically the same as this. You try to call something that's undefined. Note though that it's at runtime. This is still being set and then the subroutine is called and you get this. You can do this in PL6. PL6, all subroutines are local. Lexical, lexical I should say. So this is by default already only known inside this scope. And the funny thing is that it doesn't say foo. This does. Why is that? Because at compile time, PL6 already realizes that you won't be able to call this subroutine. It doesn't exist. So at compile time it will tell you that that subroutine doesn't exist. Which is very handy because then you don't have to run your program for 5 minutes to actually find out that the subroutine didn't exist. So that's very handy feature of PL6. It will tell you when you can't call something. This also goes for methods. If the compiler can find out at compile time what the type of the object, it can find out at compile time whether the method you're trying to call on it will work or not. And these are the new subroutine signatures in PL5. You can specify the name of the variable for a positional parameter, and you can specify a name of a hash to catch all of the name parameters. So if I just say $f and hash n, I get, and I call the subroutine with this, I get this. Or I get A1, B2, but yeah, the order in this here is not fixed. In PL5 you can still use @ in this case. So you can actually do both. You probably should not do that, because it doesn't make any sense to actually use @ if you're actually specifying what kind of parameters that you want to receive. In PL6, it more or less you can do the same here. The only thing you have to do here is that the hash has to be Slurpy, because a hash is an object. If you don't actually specify the Slurpy here, it just expects a hash. And in PL5 speak that would be a hash reference. Right, so the Slurpy here, the star, makes it slurp all the name parameters in. And so you get the same here. In PL6, if you try to use @ it will actually die on you at compilation time. Because @ you can use it in Perl 6, but then it will automatically create a signature for you. Right? And so if you specify a signature and use that together, you're actually specifying two signatures for the same subroutine. And you can't do that. So that's why it says it cannot override existing signature. So don't start using that together, because it will break in the future. So what are the problematic Perl 6 features in Perl 5? We have async in Perl 5. That's still dependent on iThreads, which is in a way still very problematic. If it works for you, be glad. If it doesn't, forget about it. Is basically what I'm saying here. We have promises as modules on CPAN, but they are dependent on an event loop. And the event loop, you can have different modules using promises, but depending on different event loops, so you can't use them together. And that's not very nice. We had Smart Match in Perl 5, and it's going to be deprecated. It's going to be removed. And this has been a very hard decision for the Perl 5 community, because, or Perl 5 porters, I should say, because there are parts of it that are useful, but like in Perl 5, most of Smart Match is not useful because you never know what it's going to do. And you could also argue that Perl 5 tried to implement Smart Match before Perl 6 really knew what Smart Match was going to be. So it's like it was an experiment. It's going to be deprecated. The big problem in Perl 5 really is that Perl 5 doesn't have types. You don't know what something is. And Smart Match needs to really have that to be able to function correctly. We have Perl 5 subroutine signatures, but they're really limited, and they're only synthetic sugar, really. It's really nice to have anyway, but it just shows that bolting on stuff on something is very, very hard. Get something deeper in here. Async, iThreads. If you know how iThreads work, you know what I mean. In short, iThreads in Perl is using an implementation that was originally used for emulating fork on Windows and backported to Linux to emulate threads. That makes sense to you? Okay. But the point is that in Perl 5 there's really no alternative, because there is no really internal API for access code. And that's a real problem, because anybody out there is just doing anything to the internals of Perl, and nobody's watching what's going on there. And that's exactly the problem why you can't really do threads at the code level in Perl 5. There's a module that I originally wrote as I would just say joke, but I know it's actually being used in production. It actually emulates threads in Perl 5 by using fork.
It does work.
It does work, yes.
It does work.
Anyway, but I would say if you're programming threads yourself, it's really something superhuman. The human mind, I don't think, is really equipped to handle things completely asynchronously. So there's this quote from Brian Kernighan from Kernighan and Ritchie. Debugging is twice as hard as writing the code in the first place. Therefore, if you write the code as cleverly as possible, you are, by definition, not smart enough to debug it. And this is doubly true for programming threads. It's just very hard. So it's very important to actually get rid of you programming threads and let the system figure it out for you. It's basically my point of view in this case. So look at promises. Promises are very nice because this is basically asynchronously for non-superhumans. It's very nice. In Perl 5 you already have it also. It's available as a CPAN module. As I said, it needs an event loop, but the problem is that even if you use an event loop, it's probably not asynchronous. It's just faking it in Perl 5. So it's nice to start playing with that. Smart match. Well, you need typing to make smart match work, and PL5 is most likely never going to have typing. There are still some people that think maybe we can do this in PL5, but then there's XS code that sort of breaks everything again, so I'm not really, don't think it's going to happen. It's only of limited usefulness at the moment in PL5. You really have to basically, every time you do a smart match, you have to look up what it's going to do if the right hand side is a list and the left hand side is a hash, or and stuff like that. And it's really limited use. So people are going to deprecate this. PL5 subroutine signatures, I already told you a little bit about that. 520 in May, so RC1 is there. Again, test it, make sure it works, because if you don't test it and it breaks your code, you have to wait another year, probably.
A month.
Well, generally people don't want to run production code on development versions. So. But as I said, it's synthetic sugar. You don't have real name parameters, and methods. Subroutine signatures in PL6 are part of multi-method dispatch, and I'll show you a little bit about this later. But it's nice to have signatures in PL5 nonetheless, because it really is one of the remnants of, I could almost say, Fortran or some other language that is from way behind the way that PL5 uses parameters. So this is an example of name parameters in PL6. Here you give the colon indicates a name parameter. That's the name of the parameter. This is the default value. So if you just say whatever you get here, if I call it just without any parameters, it says hey you. If I call it with plus none, it says hey plus none. Now you might argue, what the heck is this? This is just a way to expressing a pair. I'll show you. You can still use pairs like the old PL5 way in PL6, and you can ask what it is, and that's actually a pair. You can actually get a plural representation for it. It's like basically sort of data dumper, and it says it's name and plus none. It's like a fat comma here, and you can specify it like this. It's also a pair, and if you do this ask for the Perl, it actually gives you the same thing. So this is just a short way of specifying this. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 against 2, so 2 characters less. The thing is that this notation can be used anywhere where you are using one or more words. So you can also use this for a slice into a hash, for instance. Or you can specify it all sort of other ways. You just specify it as an array by itself, like QW in PL5. So it's just sort of put this all together and put it in this notation. This is an example of multi-dispatch. You can specify that a subroutine is a multi. So you can have 2 subroutines with the same name, but with a different signature. And I should have the pointer there as well. This candidate is for the numerics, this is for the strings. So if I call this with 42, I get number 42, because it matches this one. If I ask it, call it with foo, I get string foo, because it matches this one, and I get this one. So you can split this out very easily for you, and you don't actually have to do if statements inside here. If this is a string, do this. If this is a num, do that. You can just put it in the signature. So this basically comes down to types. If you specify a lexical variable like this, and you say it, it will just nicely say foo. Great. If you say this is a num, and I try to put foo in it, it'll actually say, I can't do that, because you can't put a string into a num. right? If you call it a string, you put foo in it, it works. So now you might think, oh wow, so it's going to check the types every time I do an assignment here? That's going to be very expensive. Well, yes and no, because it's highly optimized hot code. But the fact that you didn't specify here, it does not mean it's not going to do a type check. If you don't specify anything, it just means any. Any is a type like num and string. And huh?
Like any other?
Well, yeah, I was not going to say that, but yeah. So it's going to do the type check anyway. And you can put strings into any. So that's the why this works.
No, I agree. I was going to add that if you call a multi and you knows the type at compile time, and the multi is very simple, it might inline the compile time and then you're faster because of the types.
Yeah, and also, if I would only have a multi for num, it will actually give a compile time error on this one because it knows it can't actually execute that one because I only have it for num and not for string. So there's another reason for specifying types. You don't have to in Perl 6, but you may do that and it will help you. I think the official phrase for that is gradual typing. Okay, so what are the Perl 5 features in Perl 6? There's the Perl 5 interop and there's use v5. But of course it always stays hard to integrate something that doesn't actually have a description into something that has a description. So, Perl 5 interop. It actually has a grant. It's supposed to have a Perl 5 interpreter inside Rakudo or MoreVM. You could load any Perl 5 module, including ones with access. There's only one, and you call Perl 5 code for Perl 6 and vice versa. But unfortunately it's not there. And the way it's looking right now, it's not going to be here. Because the person actually doing this went AWOL. Is that something that you understand? Yeah. Away without leave, right? What was it again? Whatever.
Way without leave.
Yeah.
Missing in action.
That might imply that.
It's not the same, I know.
And missing in action might actually mean that something happened to them. Whereas AWOL implies that they went away. And unfortunately, yeah, this would have been very nice to have, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. Well, miracles can happen. Then we have use v5. This was originally started by Tim Tody, or aka Larry Wall. It's now actually done by Frogs. And basically it means that we're re-implementing Perl 5 the same way that we're implementing Perl 6. And it's using a grammar. And it's called a grammar that has actions. So it's like, internally we call this a slang or a sublanguage. And so the idea is that you can actually write a grammar that will take most of Perl 5 source code and create the internal structures that Perl 6 also uses. And then there's no difference between Perl 5 and Perl 6 anymore internally, so everything can call each other and it's no problem. It will never have access. So if you're looking at CPAN and the modules that are out there, a lot of them have access code, so they won't be portable like this to Perl 6. However, a lot of modules on CPAN also have a pure Perl version, and those will be portable, of course. Those are pure Perl. And but again, it will allow you to call Perl 5 code from Perl 6 and vice versa. And at the moment, it passes about 10% of the Perl 5 test suite. Now, there's one reason why this is only 10%. The big reason is that Perl 6 at this point does not have labels yet. Well, almost. Right, Frogs? You almost have labels in Perl 6, right?
Almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's only the review.
Who's meant to review it?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, possibly after the weekend we're going to have labels in Perl 6.
Yes.
The thing is that
For a loop.
The reason this is fairly so many tests, that anytime you do something like skip in a test in PL5, it actually internally uses a label. So all of the files that have a skip in them will never work at the moment. So once we have labels, that will go up significantly. So what we need for adoption for PL6 in the wide world, I think we need a good introduction ebook. We need more modules and CPAN support. Well, we're working on that. We need better performance. Well, we're working on that. Your rumor has it about the book that someone is working on that, but that certain someone is also doing a lot of other stuff, and that certain someone may not have so many hours to do this. He has done this before, almost 25 years ago now, I think. 23 years ago.
Welcoming call, 23 years.
Yeah, okay, all right. But if you really want to write your own book, don't let it stop you, or if you want to just blog about your experiences, please do that. Let us know that you did, and we can actually put you on the aggregator, and so everybody can see that you're doing something with PL6. More module CPAN support. Well, we can already upload Perl distributions to CPAN. Actually, since of yesterday, I think CPAN can actually tell us which PL6 distributions have been uploaded. Right? So we can actually ask CPAN, give me that module. So we're getting very close to being able to install PL6 modules from CPAN. And we'll probably have something in several hackathons porting CPAN modules to PL6. Now, of course, if we have V5, there's a very good chance that if it's a pure Perl module on CPAN, that it will just work. And we'll just make sure that it comes in the list of PL6's modules that we can use for PL6. With regards to performance, well, MoreVM is now standalone. Well, this is not much news for most people, but it didn't used to be standalone, so it is standalone now. It actually builds itself. We are creeping towards PL5. If you actually load Moose with PL5, then you have about the same startup time as PL6. And of course, Moose is already built into PL6. There's a Google Summer of Code project that has started to develop JIT for more. One of the things that Jonathan did in the past half year is actually writing the internal diagnostics of the code in MoreVM that will allow a JIT or an optimizer know what it must keep and know what it can throw away. And a lot of that is already being used, and it's one of the reasons that we have much better performance in MoreVM at the moment. But that same information will be possible to be used for JIT, so it can actually create machine level code for execution of your Perl code. Now, when we have this, and things are looking good for after the summer, there's a good chance that some benchmark will be faster than PL5. Just for the fact that we have a JIT and PL5 doesn't. So why would you use PL6 in production? Well, it has much saner implicit and explicit multi-core programming. So if you have one of those nice 16-core machines that you're running Perl in one core, it might be a point of using PL6 because it may be using more CPU, but it may be faster because it can use more CPUs. So your wall clock time will be less. We have channels, we have promises, we have supplies. So you saw something about this morning with Jonathan already. Also very important, no versioning issues with modules. That's what you saw with Frogs this morning. And of course there's lots and lots of cool features in PL6 which makes for happier programmers. And that's always good to have in production. So this is an example of the lexicality of use, and that's very important because you can specify inside your module or your program, I want to have use this version of this module in here. So this is a very simple test program that we have in PL6. It exports OK and it works, right? However, if I put this use test in the scope and I call OK, the OK is only known inside the scope. So this actually means, in a way, that if you have, for instance, have two versions of a module and you have a database that is formatted in the data structure of the one version of the module, and you have one that's and you want to migrate to the newer version of the module, you can just make sure that you get two scopes when you use the different versions of the module, and you write the code to actually go from one to the other. There's some closure thingies that you need to take care of, but you can actually quite easily do that because you can load both modules at the same time and access them at the same time. So this is an example of asynchronicity, very easy to do in Perl 6. This is an example of some work. Well, I get a random sleep, which basically means just between 0 and 1 seconds I'm going to sleep. And I'm just going to do this for 10 times and I'm just going to print the numbers. So this is the result. And if you do this with more at the moment, it takes about 5.5 seconds on my machine. If you make it, if you're not really interested in the order in which this is done, you can actually make it very easily asynchronous by starting this into a separate, as a promise, into a separate thread, and you just wait for the promise to finish, all the promises to finish. You'll see that the numbers are different in order because the random sleep takes less or more, so the order changes. But the wall clock is significantly less in this case, whereas the CPU values are about the same. So if you have something that you want to easily spread out over multiple cores, this is a very easy way to do this. This could be like, if you have a list of processing files or something like that, you just make this asynchronous like that. And here we have something we call junctions in Perl 6. This variable is either 1, 2, or 3. Some people may recognize this as quantum superpositions from Damien Conway. This is built into the core of Perl 6. So what is this? This is any 1, 2, or 3. I don't know. It's just any of those. If you want to see if this is this equal to 1, well, yeah, it's true or false or false. Right? Then, if you really want this into a single boolean, we can actually put the so in front of it. You can also put a question mark in front of it. It just depends. There's more ways to do this. And then we'll say it's true because any of them is true. So, if I want to take a random number between 0 and 9099, this is the way to do that in Perl 6. The caret means 0 to 1000 minus 1, like 718. And if I have this here for the any, so A is anything between 0 to 99, you can't do something against pressing the wrong button. Yeah. Try this again. Here, so it's any number between 0 and 99 inclusive. So if I pick a random number, will it be equal to this? And this will always be true, regardless of the number I put. However, if I do this, the same thing for here, but I have a number between 0 and 999, there's only a chance of 1 in 10 that I actually get it true. And it's going to be a lot of checking. And this basically is the plan in Perl 6. It's not implemented like that, but everything has been made ready for it, that you can actually do this check in parallel, so it becomes very, very fast. So this is either true or it's false. So, how can you try Perl 6? Well, if you just want to use it as a user, go to Rakudo.org, download the Rakudo Star distribution. Rakudo Star is the Rakudo development system. It's a development release from the last month, plus a lot of modules that we think could be useful to you. That's very easiest way to do that. Follow the notes there, how to install it. If you want to be a developer on it, want to fool around with it, well, you just create a directory, you do a git clone, you go into the directory, you do a pull configure, you do a make install, and voila, you have a Perl 6 available. Now, for me, this takes, depending on bandwidth and CPU that you have on your machine, this takes in the order of 10 minutes. So, not a lot of work, and well, you don't need to do much. Where can you get support for Perl 6? Well, of course, there's the Perl 6 channel on Freenode that you can go to. There's a lot of examples for Perl 6 in Rosetta code. So there you can compare, for instance, how Perl 5 and Perl 6 are doing it, or other languages for certain tasks. There's a lot of inspiration that you can find in the presentations that Jonathan has given. And you can find the presentation from this morning there as well. Well, previous version of it, I think, yeah. There's a whole set of blogs here on the planetaria.org. And if you're coming from Perl 5, there's actually a nice website, nice set of articles about moving from Perl 5 to Perl 6, written by Moritz Lenz. And of course, if you really want to get to the nitty-gritty, you can actually go to the synopsis and go through them there. Not everything is implemented in there, but most things are. So, I think this is how the Camel is decocooning. That's right. So, any questions?
What's your view on the coexistence of Rakudo, Parrot, Morgan, JVM?
I think Parrot only has one semi-active maintainer at the moment. There's nobody actually developing anything in Parrot anymore. So I think you should consider Parrot, at least at this point in time, more or less dead project. And going forward with all the features that Rakudo is going to implement, a lot of them are not implementable on Parrot. All the asynchronous things that Jonathan has shown this morning don't run on Parrot. They run on the JVM, they run on More, but not on Parrot. Because Parrot has a thread model that some people don't even consider to be a thread model. And yeah, just can't do what we needed to do. So if you're looking to the future, I don't think Parrot as a virtual machine will continue to exist, but it will miss a lot of features that people will want to use. So yeah, it's going to be deprecated, I think.
And as to Rakudo and More?
Well, More is the virtual machine that has been developed explicitly for running Perl 6. So you could argue More is Parrot what Parrot should have been. You can't really blame Parrot for that, because at the time when Parrot started, people in the Perl 6 community did not really know what they wanted anyway. So a lot of things were done and decided on, okay, let's do it like this because they're probably going to need it like that. And they didn't, and so it sort of diverged in that sense. So I see Rakudo and More together, more as Perl 6 than anything else. Rakudo running on the JVM is something that is really nice to have, because it will open the doors for a lot of places where the management has decided everything has to run on the JVM. So you can use it there as well.
A slight addition to that, if you have something long running, then the JVM still beats More in many cases. The JVM has an awesome JIT, and basically we're not quite there yet.
But this was the long-term
prediction.
Yeah. Hope that's an answer. Any more questions?
Do you have a clue what's the percentage of pure Perl modules on CPAN?
pure core.
No.
I'm talking about 10%.
It's not that easy, because even if you have a module that's pure Perl, it's very likely that it has a dependency that's not. So yeah, just look at a module like DBIX class and count the dependencies and the dependencies of the dependencies. It's like 30 or 40, and yeah, it's hard.
But if I look, for instance, at Darkpad, the code that lives inside companies, and most companies using Perl actually don't write access code.
Yeah.
So they use pure Perl. One big example until about a year and a half ago, all of Booking.com code was pure Perl code. It ran on Perl using access with standard modules, but there was no access code of itself. So my point in this is really, if you are a company and you are wanting to move from Perl 5 to Perl 6 and you have a large Perl 5 code base, there's a good chance it's going to work because you're not using access.
Often.
Well, often, generally, yeah. So if we get the key modules of CPAN that use access, if we get a Perl 6 equivalent for that, then we should be set for a lot of cases for companies out there using Perl 5 to migrate to Perl 6.
Are there any milestones set for the next years in terms of programming?
Well, milestones. We talk about
Christmas.
no. Internally we have some milestones, and there's in the past it has happened several times with Perl 6 that some promises were made and there was no delivery. And I think inside the people working on Perl 6 is now more or less the opposite, the other way around. Let's not promise anything, but deliver. But Wendy might want to say something about that.
You can work with Perl 6. She just gave you a couple of hints how to install Perl 6. Just do that, start working with Perl 6, you will find out that you can do a lot of things. There's a lot of things in Perl 6 that already work, that work fine, that work fast, that work reliable, and will be a lot of fun. Because they're a little bit different from Perl 5, and a lot of that stuff is easier than in Perl 5. Just don't have to believe me, try it for yourself.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm well out of time. If you have any other more questions, please ask me later. Meanwhile, I'm going to say thank you for the White Camel Award that you as a community gave to us.